Okay, let's look at how the slave system worked in America in the South in the mid-1800s. The slave trade stops in 1808 in terms of slaves coming from Africa, but as the new children were born, the slave population continued to grow, and slaves were actively traded in America all the way through the Civil War. At the cornerstone of the slave trade is field work. Vast majority of the slaves um, in the slave system worked in the fields on plantations. They did all the work that machines do today: clearing fields, planting, harvesting, weeding, irrigating, digging drainage ditches. Anything that you need for successful farming had to be done by hand, and the slaves on these plantations did it. You see, here's cotton being picked by hand, and you don't see much joy in the people's faces that are there. The days were endlessly long, sun up to sundown, limited or no breaks, not a whole lot of hope. A better job would be working in the planter's home. Um, Women were selected to do this. They were served as butlers, cooks, nurses. It was a 24-hour job, waiting on and serving the planter and his family. You would usually have better shelter, maybe better food, better clothing. If you did this job, sometimes the young women who the planter considered to be attractive would be subjected to advances by the planter, and there's really nothing they could do about that. So that was an evil, dark side. Anytime you give someone complete and utter control over another person, and power over another person, evil tends to creep in, and it creeped in some of the worst ways on these plantation homes. Perhaps the best job was being a skilled artisan worker on a large plantation. Large plantations had people in charge of carpentry, blacksmithing, all kinds of different jobs, and these people did not have to work in the fields, and they could work really hard and work extra, and sometimes do jobs for other local yeoman farmers and other farms and make a little side money, and then eventually, maybe over a period of decades, save enough money to buy their own freedom. Life under slavery was miserable. It was horrible. It was horrific. The slaves were treated as property, not as people. They could be traded or sold at any time. They could be punished in any way. They were subjected to horrible living conditions, limited food. Some of our most classic cooking, though, does come from the slave tradition of making a lot out of a little. They would get the meat scraps and turn them into stews and jambalaya and different ham and beans, things like that have become classic American Southern cooking. So making the best out of humble ingredients is something the slave traditions have definitely taught us. You can see some slave homes there, and in a hut like this, 10, 12 people easily fit in there. Inside, there's no furniture. You just sleep on the floor, and not a lot of ventilation either. So it get very hot and sticky in the summer and cold in the winter. Obviously, plantation owners did not expect their slaves to act out in any way. If they did, they had to be made an example of, and so they devised horrible, horrific punishments, such as putting the person in a stock in a terrible, bad position, and then as they got tired and fatigued, the wood would cut into their skin and their hands and their necks. Horrible whippings, simply just placed in holes where they were just put in a hole with just a breathing hole and stuck down there for a few days. The slave codes permitted all these horrible punishments. They also forbid that slaves get educated. That their biggest fear for a plantation owner was that their slaves learn how to read and write, because if they read and write, they're going to learn that the world's a much bigger place than the plantation, and there's freedom out there. And if they read and write, they can understand how to get to that freedom, and how to read road signs and train schedules and other things needed for freedom. So the number one thing they tried to stop was education, because education equals freedom. So if anyone's trying to limit your education on any topic, they may be trying to restrict your freedom in some way. Beware of that. Punishments were horrible, horrible beatings, um, horrible scars on this man's back. Um, Very horrific. Again, when you give someone ultimate power over another person, horrible things can happen. Slave codes, again, they authorized all the punishments and gave the slaves no rights to fight against it. So, what's the life lesson we can learn from this? How did this evil come to America? All this horrible slavery leading to a horrible civil war. Well, it didn't all come at once. It snuck in a little bit at a time. The first couple slaves came to Jamestown. back in the 1600s, and over time more and more slaves came. The treatment of slaves got worse and worse as greed continued to grow. And the life lesson for us of this is, you don't let evil or immorality sneak into your life. Nobody becomes a hardened criminal in one day. They do one small immoral thing at a time, and each time you do something that's immoral, your moral compass moves a little bit if you don't check it. No one becomes a compulsive liar all at once. It starts with one lie that leads to 2 lies, that leads to 3 lies, till you get comfortable with lying. No one becomes a hardened criminal all at once. It may start with a small shoplifting. Oh, that didn't hurt anybody. That's fine. And then we steal something a little bigger, and then we're doing theft, and then we're grabbing a weapon and doing armed robbery or burglary. Then something goes wrong, we pull the trigger, and now we're a killer. These things sneak up on us. All of us do things that are immoral from time to time, but we have to check ourselves and stop ourselves when it's small. Our country didn't do that. As a result, we had a horrific time of slavery in our country and a horrific civil war to end it. So stop immorality while the consequences are small.